So every February, we celebrate the culture characteristic of understand. So culture is just simply the words that people would use to describe how a group acts when they're together. So if we were to go out to a party and we were to observe everybody at the party and they were all like very friendly and family oriented, we would leave that party and somebody would say, "Hey, how was the party?" And you'd say, "Oh, it was great. It was friendly and fun and family oriented." In other words, those are the words that we were used to describe that group of people when they were acting, or how they act when they were together. So that's really simply culture. And there's lots of other, you can look up the word culture, there's lots of other ways to describe it, but at its very core, it's all about the impression that we leave on somebody else, or that impression that they leave with in terms of how they perceive, or the words they would use to describe that group. So at Secure HR, at Secure HR and at Amazing Workplace, one of the things that we decided to do years ago, kind of a playbook out of, I believe it was Amazon did this, and I'm sure others have as well, is to just create a list of like, hey, here are the things that we want to practice, and here are the things that we want to focus on, so that when somebody meets us or works with us, they walk away with the words that we'd like them to walk away with, right? For example, in January, it's the month of care. And we would very much like, anytime we work with somebody, whether that's a client or another company or a partner, that they leave with the impression that we're a group that cares, right? So month two, which is the month of February, is understand. So this is all about making sure that we understand. And I really want to tie this into a topic that has been something I've really discussed recently, and I'll continue to talk about, which is the topic of firing or terminations or separations when an organization decides that it's time to part ways with an employee. And understanding is really foundational to this entire topic. And there's a lot of information out there that is useful on the topic of how to let somebody go or fire or termination separations. And there's some information out there that might be somewhat misleading. So I just kind of want to dive in and tie in this important activity that impacts people's lives to the culture characteristic of understanding. So first and foremost, best case scenario, if you have to let somebody go, if you have to fire somebody, the best case scenario is that individual, when you meet with them, already understands. Like, you don't even need to tell them. Like, you bring them into your office. Always advise to have two people in the room when you decide to let somebody go, so that you have a witness on your side for your company. Really important, very important thing to do. So you have the two people in the room, yourself and somebody else, and someone else. That employee comes in, you know that it's a termination discussion, it's a firing discussion. We're going to let this person go. Best is that they already understand why. They understand that it's better for the company if they're gone, and they understand that it's better for them if they leave. That, if you could wave a magic wand, every one of those discussions would go that way. That there's just no confusion. There's no feeling of like, what's happening, or like, what's going on, right? That would be the best. Now, that's not always possible. And let's talk about why that isn't possible. So one, for example, is, let's say that it's actually a layoff or a downsizing. So say your organization evaluates, the dollars and cents and money, and you decide that there's a group of individuals that need to be let go. There's not a lot that can be done about the surprise part of that, but what can be shared is that as a result of a financial analysis, as a result of looking at our finances, we decided that we needed to let certain groups or certain individuals go in order to be able to do what we need to do financially. And we're downsizing this department, or we're lay off. Not every organization wants to use that word, but one or the other, it's downsizing or layoff. And at least now that individual understands that it's nothing more than that. Like, it's a money thing. And you can even say that. You could say, hey, this is a money thing. It's not personal. It's not you. It's a money thing. And then you kind of move on to the next steps as to whatever you want to do with that individual, whether there's a severance agreement, meaning that you're going to give them some money in exchange for them signing an agreement, not to file a lawsuit, so forth and so on. Maybe there's an amount of money that you give them in order to help them get on their feet, meaning that you give them a couple weeks severance, or maybe even a month, whatever that is that makes sense for your organization. But that helps them understand why it's all happening in a situation that they might otherwise feel surprised, because they just had no idea coming into your office that, hey, I didn't realize that I was going to be let go, right? So that's one situation where if you're letting people go as a result of a downsizing or a layoff, they may not have any idea that it's coming, and you may run into that. Wait a minute, I don't understand. Like this is frustrating. This is upsetting, because not understanding is frustrating and upsetting, right? So when we talk about the culture characteristic of understand and the importance of understanding, understanding is not the same as agreement, but what it does do is it puts everybody on the same page, meaning that we can all look at the same thing and know what the thing is. Whether we agree with opinions about that is different. Like if I look at a bottle of mustard and you look at a bottle of mustard and we both agree that it's mustard and we understand that it's mustard, well, it is. We may not agree on whether it tastes better than ketchup, but we both understand that it's mustard, right? So with understanding and letting somebody go, really important that there is some understanding, because that significantly reduces lawsuit risk for your organization. It significantly reduces added frustration and or reactions that the person may have, right? So they may leave your organization, and if they don't understand or they're confused about why they were let go, they'll often just be stuck trying to solve that mystery. And then whether it's true or not, they will sometimes make up reasons why. And that's where lawsuit problems can happen. We let an individual go, they have no idea why, and they then leave and they're just confused about it, and they think about it and they remember some conversation and they start making stuff up in their head, which may or may not be true. And the next thing you know, you've got a lawyer at your doorstep telling you that this individual has filed a lawsuit against your company because they feel like they were discriminated against, and you're looking at the lawyer and you're wondering what are they talking about? Like, because it maybe from your point of view they were let go because they weren't doing their job or because of some specific reason. But if that person doesn't understand, then it's going to be very difficult for them to walk away with that understanding without then trying to find another understanding that may or may not be true. So we talked about the first scenario, which is where you bring somebody in and they just have no clue what's happening and they're surprised, and that would be more of like a layoff or a downsizing, or for financial reasons, we're going to part ways, right? The second bucket is we're letting somebody go often, and this is probably the most common that I hear about, it's often performance failures, meaning that, let me simplify that. There's an employee that was hired to do a job. They're not doing the job as well as we'd like them to. It could be that they're not doing it as well as somebody that was in that role before. It could be that they're just not getting things done quickly enough. It could be that you just look at the amount of money that you're spending on this resource and you look at what they're getting done and you say, this isn't fair for us as an organization. So they're not performing well. Now, this one's a little tougher because most organizations allow this to go on too long, and then they get to the point where they're now frustrated, unwilling to continue paying for something that they don't feel like they're receiving good benefit in return. And it's at that moment that often an organization will say, okay, well, we need to let this person go, and we bring them in and we let them go. But there's been no prior discussion. There's been no dialogue or maybe minimal conversations with the person who's not performing well. One of the things that's really important as you're running an organization and as you're working with individuals, and this ties back to understanding, is that you've got to start with a job description. You need to know as an organization, what is this person doing for my company? And it should be written down. It doesn't need to be super complicated. You could even just have a list of tasks or things that you expect a person to do with some simple just expectations connected to that. So if I bring somebody in and I want them to do, let me use a simplified example so I don't get into a bunch of complicated stuff. Say I bring in a lawyer and I want them to research or look stuff up and answer questions. Their job description would be, you're a lawyer. Your job is to research, read information, and to provide simple explanations for others to understand. And it could be that basic simple, right? Yes, you can get more involved, but at a high level, you've got something in writing that the lawyer can read and they can understand. You now have put it in writing and you understand the expectations for this person, and that person goes and does their job. So that lawyer, let's just say that they come in and they stop reading. So now they're not even doing their job, and it was in writing. If they're not actually reading and they know they're not reading, and you bring them into your office and you say, hey, if you remember, we have this job description. Part of the job description is reading, understanding, and explaining things simply. You're not reading. So if you're not reading, then you're not doing your job that we agreed that you were going to do, and it was part of why we hired you. So you can have the conversation, and now it's less about you versus them. You've created this document over here or this job description, and we can both look at that job description and say, hey, this is what we agreed to. This is what we agreed that you were going to do when you came to the organization, and you're now not doing that. And it should be understood, or there shouldn't be any frustration or annoyance that this is what we agreed to, and now it's not happening, and we're just talking about it now. We're talking about how do we fix that, right? And that's all about making sure that we create that understanding up front with the individual employee. They really get and understand what their job or role is. And as a result of that, if later the person isn't performing, we can point to the job description as to the things that aren't getting done. And that employee can also look at that and agree, yeah, you're right, those aren't getting done. Or they may disagree, but at least you have a guide or a list of things that clearly set out the expectations that they read and hopefully understood, and then we can get together with that individual and use that as the discussion for letting somebody go or termination or whatever you want to do in between. Some organizations are really fast to fire. Personal preference, there's some risks with that. There's also some benefits to that, and we could kind of debate that all day long, as others have. There's organizations that have very structured performance improvement plan processes or feedback where if an individual isn't performing, we bring them in, we let them know verbally, we let them know that we're going to put something in writing in their employee file, connected hopefully to their job description. Here's the expectation as a researcher. You agreed that you were going to read and understand and then explain things simply. You're not reading. That's kind of a problem in this role, and we're going to put that we're going to put it in writing. We're going to send it to you, and we're just letting you know verbally that this is something that needs to be fixed by this time frame. Otherwise, we may have to explore, severing the employment relationship or stopping the employment relationship, whatever terminology or words you want to use. So that's a way to do it where you're now adding a little bit of time, whether that's 30 days, 60 days, 90 days or more, but you're adding some structure and time and documentation. And most law firms or lawyers would advise that a company follows that type of process because it helps really document the activity between the company and the employee in a way that makes it clear that it's not something else. This wasn't a discrimination thing. This wasn't retaliation against an employee. This is just purely they're not performing the different things that we agreed to in their job description. We've informed them of that. We've worked with them to help them fix that, and they've not fixed it, so it's time to go. So that can increase understanding between yourself, the organization, and the employee when you make the time to do that type of activity. It's not always possible, and there's situations where an individual employee does something that really has nothing to do with the job description, and that thing they do just isn't a good fit for the organization. So let's say, for example, you have somebody that comes in, they've not done anything illegal, but they come in and they're just rude to people. Nothing illegal about that. It may not align with your culture, but it's creating a bad impact on others. And it's really more of this person in the way that they treat others is difficult for your organization to tolerate because it's not what you want inside of your organization. And this one's a little tougher because it's not here's a job, I didn't do the job. It's the person comes in and they're a jerk and they're just not fun to work with and nobody likes working with them and it's creating lots of problems. So in those situations, it's a little tougher in that we're dealing with a situation where it's just not a good fit. Now, one option, if it's true, is to let that individual go as a result of downsizing and or a layoff. If that's truly why you're letting them go, then you can go that route, and that helps a bit because it gives them a reason why. That doesn't make it feel personal. But getting into the details of them being difficult, saying things to them like, well, it's because you're a jerk. These are not good things to say. It ends up coming across as very attacking and personal. And there's a more compassionate, understanding way of doing that. And it's just simply, it's not a good fit. It's not a good culture fit. And you can even bring the person in, sit them down and ask them things. Oftentimes when people are angry or mean to others at work, they're not happy. And I've had success in sitting people down before where I come into a room and I sit down and I just simply open up with, how are you doing? How are things going? And a lot of times they will open up with, or they'll talk about all their frustrations and aggravations and so forth and so on. Occasionally those frustrations are completely legitimate. more often than not in those scenarios, it's just that individual's opinion of the workplace and the people around them. It's not a good culture fit, and they're not happy. And that's often what I will lean into, where I will then let them talk. I'll explore how they feel about work, how they feel about the things they're getting done. I'll even ask them directly, like, are you really happy at work? And they'll often say, no, I'm not. So then I will lean into that as a reason why maybe we should part ways as friends. Because if a person's not happy, what I'll say to them heartfeltly is, that's the last thing I want. The last thing I want is you showing up to work miserable. Let's part ways as friends. Let me do what I can do to get you on your feet and allow you to go pursue a job or a career where you are happy, because you're not here. And I don't want that for you. Nobody wants that for you. And often that is a way to handle those conversations. And now they know that it's because they weren't happy, and it doesn't have to be because you were a jerk. It could be because you're not happy. And if you're being a jerk to others, it's probably because you're not happy at work. So we'll use that a lot of times as we're looking at how to let somebody go that is in that bucket, or we're advising somebody on how to let somebody go that's in that bucket. So making the time to make sure that people understand the reasons behind a termination or a separation is really important. In some cases, it is tough, and it is very difficult to get into the details, because the things that are the real reasons why, the person on the other end just probably wouldn't be willing to hear. And in those scenarios, it's not a good fit, or this is not great for you, and it's not great for us, and we've decided that we want to part ways as friends. We can get into all the reasons why. We can stir up all of that emotional upset, or we can just agree we're going to part ways as friends. We're going to do, ideally in that scenario, you're able to offer a severance or a severance agreement. We're going to offer you this in order to help you get on your feet. We wish you the best. And I just don't want us to ever have ill feelings towards one another if we run into each other out on the street or at a coffee shop, right? The goal is to try to separate in such a way that there's not that frustration or aggravation. It's really important that if you run into a situation where you're concerned about letting somebody go because things have happened. So this is the worst. You have a person who's not doing their job. You don't have job descriptions. You've not done a performance improvement plan. They've recently requested leave or time off, and you're legally required to give them that time off for whatever reason. So in the middle of all this, like, they're taking extra time off, they're not doing their job. But on your side, you've not really done all the things you needed to do to be HR compliant. You don't have all these things in place. You don't have all these protections in place. But yet you're in this just uncomfortable situation where you've got to let this person go. It's a tough one. It really is a tough one, because now that individual has no idea what their job was. They have no idea that this is coming. It's not financial. It's not like a layoff or downsizing. And on top of that, they've just recently asked for something that could potentially be used as a lawsuit for discrimination, or it's a terrible, crappy scenario, right? In those instances, it really makes sense to sit down and evaluate what is the best smart step to protect the company and the organization. What, if anything, do I have that would protect me as a company if the person were to come back and say, hey, I was fired for illegal reasons. I was wrongfully terminated because I asked for leave and they retaliated against me, and that's why they fired me, even though, and I'm assuming that's not the case, that retaliation is illegal. Don't do that. But assuming that there's actually a good reason to let the person go, making the time to maybe evaluate whether you've got to add some time to that separation process in order to protect your organization is really worth taking a look at. Or you can get with a consultant or an HR expert or an attorney and kind of walk through, like, what are the best ways to do this, and what are all the risks that I may not be thinking about, in terms of the individual, any protected classes that they're a member of, any other things that they may use to sue your organization, even though you're wanting to let them go because they are in fact not doing the job that you expect them to do, and you can kind of point to that. So gathering that information and having it available as a basis to let them go is important. And along those lines, I haven't really talked about this yet. Coming in and like hitting somebody verbally or attacking them is just a bad idea. I've run into situations where employers are so frustrated with an employee that they kind of want to stick it to them verbally. They want to tell them all the bad things the employee has done as they're letting this person go. It's just, even if everything you're saying is true, it's just a bad way to end the relationship. Don't burn the bridges. You don't want that person going online, leaving you bad reviews that then your customers or others are going to read. You don't want that person to tell everybody they know what a terrible company you are, whether that's true or not. These are just not outcomes that you want as an organization. Just take the high ground. And what I mean by that is like treat that individual with respect and with care, even if they're the worst individual ever, even if they're the worst employee you've ever had, even if they've done terrible things. Maybe they came in the office and they physically hit somebody. You don't need to be a jerk when you let them go. You can be calm. You can be, and if you can't be, get somebody else in the room that can be, truly, and let that person talk, and you can just sit there and be quiet. But when you let people go, do it in a way that's respectful and caring, no matter who the individual is, and make sure you set a good example along those lines, because it's gonna help you in the long run, and it's gonna reduce lawsuit risk. Because the moment somebody leaves and they tell a lawyer that they were yelled at, or that they were criticized, or that as they left they were told all these things that they had done wrong and they didn't even know it, right? These are all pieces of ammunition that lawyer is going to use to come back to your organization and try to extort at least $100,000 out of your company, all because you didn't handle that conversation as well as you could have. So really making sure that the individual understands when they can why they're being let go, and then handling it really respectfully with care, having two people in the room. These are all basic things to do that really help you as an organization part ways with somebody in a way that everybody has understanding and isn't left frustrated or confused or searching for a reason why. It'll help protect your organization and really help you let that person go in a way that doesn't then sit in their head lingering for years. Like, why did I ever get fired from that job? Better to just solve that. Let them know. Again, doing it in a way that protects your company. Ideally, you have a job description, they're not doing that job, as I mentioned at the earlier part of this talk, or there's an actual reason why that they understand, and best is they walk into the room and they already know, right? So do you know where we're talking? Yeah, I kind of know. Okay, great. Well, let's just agree that we're going to part ways as friends, right? And try to keep it friendly and be supportive in a way that you can be supportive to the level that you can be supportive, right? I do realize that there are situations where people get let go because they've done something horrible or terrible. Again, doing that with some compassion and understanding is much better than with frustration or anger. Just don't be an organization that's known for firing people rather in a terrible way. It's just not. It's not a reputation you want in the marketplace. You want people, if they do leave, either voluntarily or involuntarily, you really want people to look back at your organization and admire it for something in some way. And if nothing else, let them admire it for the way that you separated. Let them admire it for the way that you decided to let that person go, or part ways, and that you did the right thing. You treated them better than any other organizations ever treated somebody when they let that person go, and just do it with understanding and with care. So anyhow, that's a little bit of tying understanding into the firing process within your organization, and we'll talk more about separations and firing more in future talks, so forth and so on. Thanks.